We're gonna call the meeting to order. If I could trouble somebody to shut the door for us. Thank you. All right. Today, we have a hearing for the University of Kansas and the University of Kansas Medical Center. To kick it all off, we have Dayton Lemunion, our king of Kansas Legislative Research Departments, for this budget subcommittee and our fearless guide along this path of budgeting. Appreciate you, brother. All you.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Dayton Lemunion, my official title is Principal Fiscal Analyst for Legislative Research. So I'll be presenting the budgets for KU and KU Med today. We'll start with KU. It should be first in your packet. Thank you. And I'd like to turn to page 8 to get right into the fiscal year 26 revised estimate. The first thing I'll note on that page is in the approved budget, section 1. In 2025 SB 125, there were two appropriations for this agency, two significant appropriations. The first being the 2025 pay plan, which for KU totaled 12.8 million, including 3.7 million SGF, and housing bonding authority, language which authorized bonding authority of $100 million for student housing on the Lawrence campus. So those items are already in the approved budget. After the legislature adjourned and the fiscal year ended, there was a portion of the money that was unspent. So they have SGF reappropriations totaling $5.8 million. Those include IT infrastructure and cybersecurity, funding for the Law Enforcement Training Center, and if you'll turn to page 9 or the next page, 5.1 million in capital renewal initiative. So that's the bulk of the reappropriation, and it's funding for ongoing capital projects, which I've noted there. Additionally, the agency reappropriated 13.3 million in unspent EBF funds. So those funds, again, are used for capital projects that are ongoing. In terms of other changes, similar to the other universities you've seen, I'd note that for KU, all of the SGF increase, so the 1.7 million, that's an increase over the approved, is related to transfers from the Kansas Board of Regents. The first of those transfers is 1.2 million for Student Success NIST Playbook. Looking at item 5, capital improvements, the revised estimate includes an increase of 85.3 million. This is primarily due to funding for the football stadium renovation project appearing on the budget or in the budget. Previously, it was not planned to be shown through the state budget process. However, since the project did receive ARPA monies, the entirety of those costs are now reflected here in the budget. Additionally, this includes transfers from KBOR for EBF, 15.7 million, and Kansas Campus Restoration Act, which is 7.4 million. Looking at item 6, the revised estimate includes an increase of 16.2 million, including just under 500,000 SGF. This increase is due to higher than anticipated federal financial aid expenses flowing through the budget. Additionally, the SGF increase is a transfer from the Board of Regents for need-based aid. Looking at item 7, the revised estimate includes an increase of 8.3 million for salaries and wages. This is primarily due to the agency using their funding sources to supplement the pay plan to provide the market pay adjustment. And looking at item 8, the revised estimate includes other adjustments resulting in an increase of about 6.5 million in fiscal year 26. This includes anticipated contractual services expenditures, including for the Johnson County Education Research Triangle funding, as the agency had paid off a bond which freed up additional funding there. And the overall increase is partially offset by a technical correction which shifts 3.2 million in student union fund monies from commodities to and non-expense off-budget category. The revised estimate also includes a decrease of 143 FTE positions. And I'd be happy to stand for questions or continue on.
Any questions for Dayton in 2025? Representative Amix?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dayton under the Housing Bonding Authority, and just refresh my memory if you can. If not, I'll ask the chancellor when it comes up. Did that include the new units to be built in the Gateway project and the refurbishing of dormitories that already exist?
Mr. Chair, Representative, I apologize, I don't have that information. But if the Chancellor can't answer it, I'll get that answer for you.
Put a pin in that one. Any further questions for Dayton? I have one. Can you tell me a little bit more about the Law Enforcement Training Center? I don't know that I'm familiar with a law enforcement training center on campus. To which law enforcement are we using? Is this the campus police department, Lawrence Police Department?
I'm gonna try not to get out of my levels here, but I believe the Law Enforcement Training Center is located outside of Hutchinson.
You has oversight of of Plessy? Okay, good to know. You learn something new every day. All right, anybody else? Representative Wagner.
Dayton, the question on salaries and wages. So the 8.3 million, so that is the entire increase in salaries and wages from the prior year, or is that just some increase on top of their normal increase?
Mr. Chair, Representative, so looking at page 8, line 7, salaries and wages, that would be the entirety of the increase over the approved budget. So within that approved budget line 1, it includes the pay plan increase that was approved last year. And compared to that final approved number, the agency has budgeted an additional 8.2 million using, their varied funding sources. And
Okay.
so yeah, that's the entirety of the salaries
Thank
and
you.
wages.
Appreciate
increase.
the clarity.
All right, moving on to 2027. Yep, go ahead, Dayton.
All right. Turning to the fiscal year 2027 analysis. The first thing I'd note is that compared to their approved budget, there's a reduction of 16.4 million for capital projects that occurred in fiscal year 26 but do not recur. And then moving into the other changes in the budget, item 2, similar to fiscal year 26, the request includes an increase of 11.5 million for student aid due to increased federal financial aid higher than what was anticipated in the budget they submitted last year. And for salaries and wages, we see an increase of 10.7 million, the bulk of which is continuing the implementation of that pay plan from 26. Item 4, the agency's request includes 1.2 million SGF for fiscal year 27. So these are increases for fringe benefits based on the cost indices. And turning to the final page, the request includes other adjustments resulting in an increase of 9.4 million. And this includes, again, Johnson County Education Research Triangle funding being available due to paying off the bond, offset by the technical decrease, changing the 3.2 million in the Student Union Fund to non-expense, as well as the decrease of 143 FTE. Before I turn it over for questions, I direct you to the shorthand document. If you don't have that with you, we do have extra copies here in the room. But turning to page 4, University of Kansas. Adrian's grabbing the extra copies in case anyone needs one.
This is a document we're supposed to remember to bring every day that I never remember to bring. So thank you.
It's this document with the blue header. We've got copies here in the room in case anybody forgets it in future days.
Good forward thinking, Adrian. Thank you.
So turn into University of Kansas, page 4. The Special Budget Committee, as you'll recall, had a global motion to eliminate SGF reappropriations for non-capital projects For the University of Kansas, that resulted in a deletion of 472,000 SGF for IT infrastructure and cybersecurity funding. And then so that's the SBC adjustment, just that one adjustment. Then I turn your attention to the next document in your packet, the yellow governor sheet. The governor has two adjustments compared to the special budget committee. The governor did not lapse the reappropriation, so that's the first one. And then in fiscal year 2027, the governor recommended a slight decrease for the state water plan funding for the geological survey. So that's a deletion of about $49,000. And that's based on revenue estimates for the water plan fund. So other agencies also have a similar haircut. Finally, you have a document with a chart which looks familiar to the chart you received for WSU. There was a request to map the enrollment trend on the SGF and all funds expenditures. So the first chart are those raw numbers, and the second chart adjusts the scale. You'll see in the first chart there's what appears to be a significant dip in enrollment, and that second chart really just normalizes those scales. And now I'd be happy to stand for questions.
Any questions for Dayton in 2027? I have one. So just to be clear, so I'm on the right page, the governor has chosen to reappropriate the 472,226, but reduced the geological surveys, state water plan funding. That's correct?
Mr. Chair, yes, that's correct.
Sure, I'm reading this correctly. All right. Okay, with no further questions, Dayton, you can proceed to the, oh, I'm sorry, Representative Haskins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I believe the form speaks for itself, but just to ask for due diligence, I don't see any deductions or actions reversed for fiscal year 2027 for the University of Kansas. Is that correct?
Mr. Chair, Representative, no, neither so the Special Budget Committee did not make any changes to the fiscal year 27 budget.
Thank you very much.
I'm sorry, were you asking what the Special Budget Committee did to the budget? Is that-
Yes, that's correct. And
So I'm not reading the Special Budget Committee did remove the reappropriation, right?
for 2026, but not for nothing was done for 2027. The next one is the University of Kansas. Yeah.
I see what you're asking.
It threw me too, because normally you see it, but yeah.
Something on both, right? Okay. You may proceed to the medical center.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The next document in your packet should be the University of Kansas Medical Center. And we'll turn again to the fiscal year 26 analysis page. For the University of Kansas Medical Center, their approved budget included the 2025 pay plan, which totaled $10.5 million, including $2.2 million from the state general fund. Additionally, the legislature approved $1.9 million SGF to the newly created specialty medical student loan program and added language reappropriating any remaining funds from two accounts, the OBGYN medical student loan account and the medical scholarships and loan psychiatry account, into that newly appropriated specialty medical student loan program account. Moving on to this year's budget. The agency had SGF reappropriations totaling $85.3 million. If you'll turn to the next page, I'll direct you to some of those larger reappropriations. The first being the Kansas Medical Scholarship Loan Psychiatry, $3.4 million. And I'll note there, as of 26, these were combined with the OBGYN medical student loan account. Moving down to the Cancer Research Facility, that reappropriation totaled $72.7 million. So that is the bulk of the reappropriation. And that's for the ongoing capital project to construct a new cancer center facility. And moving down to the Health Science Biomedical Center, $6.5 million. This funding is for construction of the Wichita Biomedical Campus, which is underway. And as you'll see later in my presentation, those fundings have been transferred or are budgeted to be transferred to WSU in the current year. And finally, they had $2.2 million in demolition funding that reappropriated. In addition to the SGF reappropriation, there's an EBF Educational Building Fund reappropriation of $6.2 million. Moving to other changes, the first item there, salaries and wages. This is an all funds increase of $5.4 million. The increase is primarily due to federal funds for sponsored research and clinical contracts. You'll note there that although it's an all funds increase, it is an SGF decrease, and this is due to the agency shifting its SGF funding to contractual services. So if you'll move to the next item, which is contractual services. Here we see an all funds increase of $32.4 million, including $8.3 million SGF. So again, the SGF increase here is the flip side of that coin, where those SGF funds are being rebudgeted on contractual services. However, the bulk of the increase is due to additional administrative charges and shared costs to the main campus, additional storage server for research purposes, as well as contracts with the KU Health System, the VA, and other affiliates. In fiscal year 26, the entities contracted with an additional 59 residents, and those associated expenditures are reflected here. However, I'd note that those costs are reimbursed, so it's more of a pass-through than anything else. Turning to item 6, the revised estimate includes an increase of $18.8 million, including a decrease of $6.5 million SGF. So there, the decrease of SGF is due to the transfer of $6.5 million to WSU. So when I presented the WSU budget, you saw an increase of $6.5 million. So here, that is a net zero statewide. Additionally, the funding includes transfers from KBOR for EBF of $6.5 million, Kansas Campus Restoration Act, $3.1 million, as well as federal grants for the Cancer Center building. Looking at item 7, other adjustments result in an increase of $4 million, including an increase of $154,000 SGF. That SGF increase is due to the transfer for need-based aid, while the rest of the increase is related to commodity increases for research supplies. Additionally, the revised estimate includes an increase of 141.8 FTE positions. This is headcount in new programs, including for the biomedical campus, as well as those residents that are with contracted affiliates. And I'd be happy to stand for questions.
Questions for Dayton? Representative Riley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Could you just, dig into that a little bit more of the increase in over 1,000 FTEs over the last, 8 years? 1,001.85 increase in FTEs. Where'd that all come from?
Mr. Chair, Representative. I can't speak so much to the historical trend. I'd have to dig a little more into that. I can speak to the one this year, which is largely, to my understanding, and I know they'll give you the details to fill this in, but the KU Med Center is contracted with a new hospital to provide residents to them. So that's a lot of the increased FTE in this year. As for how it's grown over the years, I'd have to defer to the agency or find that and come back.
Follow up, Representative Riley.
Yeah, just follow up. So is that part of their taking over other medical centers? Is that where that came from? So more you can drill into that, more I'd like to know. Thanks.
Representative Haskins. Is there any additional information, Dayton, that you think the committee should know to understand why the FTEs in higher ed in general, but specifically this situation is different than, say, the FTEs in a government agency? Is there any additional information you can help us with?
Speaking kind of generally, for a lot of the universities, there's research funding that funds FTE increases, so those might increase as those, whether it's a federal or what have you. And then for KU Med Center specifically, that residency program, as well as the affiliates that I noted in the fiscal year 26 increase, if they're contracting with somebody, my understanding is that in a lot of cases that is actually showing as an expenditure here, but it's reimbursed. So they're getting revenue and it's passing through the agency. So there is a bit of nuance there.
So the FTE doesn't necessarily correlate to an increase in SGF, correct?
That's correct.
And I've noticed, because I too am new to higher ed, how our universities, especially concerning research, it isn't really a good metric to sit there and pick on the FTEs too much as it would be if we were talking the Department of Revenue or Secretary of State or something of that nature. Representative Riley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I understand your line of thinking on research. I guess my question is there some shrinkage there? Because sometimes the research people are hard to find too. So whether or not those are all filled, I think we need to do the fair looking at this as far as these FTEs to make sure that they're what they say they are, kind of thing. Thank you.
Great question for the next presenter. That'd be good explanation just for our edification. Representative Wagner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a question on the contractual services with the 59 residents. And so they say on the one hand, it's an expense, but on the other hand, it's a revenue stream because we get reimbursed. And so I can see the expense, but where does it come out as, income for the university or for the med center?
Mr. Chair, Representative. So what we present here is more focused on the expenditure side. I direct you maybe to the expenditures by fund on page 7, at least of my document. So this would be the revenue portion of our document that we show, since we're primarily focused on expenditures. However, I'd be happy to look into what funds specifically that reimbursement would go into, or whether it's reimbursement or what have you.
Yeah, that's a sufficient explanation. Thank you.
Representative Haskins.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and apologies but I just caught something that I wanted to follow up with. Dayton, I'm looking at page 4 of the SBC recommendation, or second handout here, and I'm looking at fiscal year 2027 under the Med Center, and it says add 141.8 FTE positions, but the action reverse is 166.8. And I didn't know if that was a typo or how we get there. And then in their budget summary on page 11, they're asking for 166.8.
Mr. Chair, Representative, yes, it looks like I copied my text there from fiscal year 26. So the number in the right-hand column is correct. Just that shorthand text is incorrect.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Dave.
Okay. Anybody further for 2026? All right, Dayton.
Okay, turning then to the fiscal year 2027 analysis. Looking at the first item, salaries and wages, the request includes an increase of 7.1 million, partially are offset by a decrease of 8 million SGF. So this continues the trend from fiscal year 26 to shift that SGF funding from salaries and wages to contractual services. Looking at the next item, contractual services, it's an increase of 27.2 million, including 8.7 SGF. And again, this continues those increased contractual services trends from fiscal year 2026. Item 10, the request includes an increase of 67.7 million, which is primarily related to the Cancer Research Building, with expenditures funded by endowment contributions. The next item is fringe benefits. For KU Med Center, the fringe benefit adjustment for 27 results in an increase of $839,000 SGF. And that is again based on the cost indices. And then finally, item 12, the revised estimate includes an increase of 624, partially offset by a decrease of 791,000 SGF, as well as the increase there of 166.8 FTE positions. So that's all for the budget summary. Turning to the shorthand document, just below the University of Kansas, you'll see University of Kansas Medical Center. This agency was impacted by two of the global motions. The first was a deletion of any FTE positions above the approved amount. So for KU Med Center in 26, that was a deletion of 141.8 and 166.8 in fiscal year 27. Additionally, there was a global motion to remove all reappropriations for non-capital projects, which totaled 3.8 million for KU Med Center. The final document is the governor's shorthand. Essentially, the governor did not recommend deleting the FTE or the reappropriations, and there are no further changes by the governor, recommended by the governor. And I'd be happy to stand for questions.
Questions for Dayton? Okay. I have one question. Why did the psychiatry program not expend their funds? Was it a timing issue? Why did it need to be reappropriated?
I hear that the chancellor is happy to take that question, so
Great.
I'll
All right.
defer that.
Stuff. All right. Well, thank you very much, Dayton. Next up, we have the Chancellor of the University of Kansas, Dr. Douglas Stroud. Welcome to committee, sir.
their medical school to then go into that specialty. Thank you. I should have turned that on there. And then in exchange for year service back to a rural part of the state. Our challenge with that program, which was created a handful of years ago, was the demand for those slots is just not there. And so while we fill some of them, it was funded more than we can actually have candidates who want it. There is and then the OBGYN one came up as well. That one was just created. There is a bill this session that would actually combine those all into one pool so that we can deploy them into the specialties that the state needs in underserved areas. As an example right now, so we have primary care, we have psych, and we have OBGYN. We don't have surgeons, we don't have anesthesiologists, we don't have pathologists, all of which you need to run a rural hospital. So the goal in this session, and I believe that comes through this committee. Thank you, Kelly. Would be to pool all of those together to allow us to deploy them into the most high demand areas as opposed to trying to do it specialty by specialty by specialty, which is how the state's done it historically. So, but that's why that money is accumulated there, and we would love to redeploy that into other specialties.
Thank you for explaining that to us. I appreciate you walking us through all the.
It's not real clear cut.
Thank you very much, and go ahead and.
Sure. And I just quick comments on the FTEs that was happening as well. You know, the trends in higher ed actually are quite significant, and you'll hear more about that in a little bit. But if you saw at the Lawrence Edwards campus, we're actually dropping FTEs by over 140. But at the medical center, you see significant growth. And the growth at the medical center is coming from probably three sources, really. One is our research funds have grown 17% year over year for the last 3 to 5 years. And so we've grown dramatically in our personnel to execute that research. Secondly, the health system continues to grow, and every physician in the health system is a faculty member at the university. Now, they're largely funded by the health system, but they show up as FTEs in our system. And so we recently had a merger with the Latham Medical Center as an example. So several of those physicians became our faculty. It did allow us to start a new residency program there, which is why you saw the 59 residents that were added, and that actually will grow again next year, which is wonderful. We've needed new residency slots. They are funded by the federal government almost completely, and then the health system makes up the rest of that funding. So they are funded for us, but it allows us to train more doctors right here in Kansas, and we know if they train here, they're more likely to stay here. So that growth I would expect to continue into the future. Since 2016, we've grown from 600 physicians at the health system to over 1,700. And that growth I anticipate will continue. So it's a very different beast than the typical university, if you will.
Thank you, Chancellor, for explaining that to us. And I know many of us on this committee are members of other budget subcommittees, especially those that concern government. And I'd like to highlight the fact that in this particular case, the FTEs are a good thing, whereas, it's not necessarily a good thing in the Department of Labor. Appreciate you explaining that to us.
Absolutely. And hopefully you have a slide deck as well that we provided in front of you. And so what I'd like to spend a little bit of time in this afternoon, and feel free to interrupt at any point with questions, please. But speak a little bit about what the University of Kansas does for the state of Kansas in particular. And if you look at that second slide, that's really a summary of an economic impact study we did through the ks Corporation, who does this nationally, using 2023 data, so the data is a little bit dated. But what you see at the bottom there is a $7.8 billion economic impact every year for the state of Kansas through all elements of KU. So that's Lawrence, that's Medical Center, and that's health system all combined. We have 31,000 students. We graduated actually last year, almost 8,000 degrees were provided to our graduates. And we continue to grow our research enterprise. Our most recent numbers that just came out last month are actually $540 million of externally funded research. So a way to think about that is doing contracts that are being funded by entities outside the state, predominantly the federal government, but industry as well. So that's money coming into the state to conduct that research and employing people here in the state. That research also generates discoveries, and those discoveries sometimes generate companies. And we currently have 54 active startup companies that have come out of KU research activity to date. If you look at the next slide, really, when we think about what our role is in the state and what our taxpayers should really expect from us, we believe it is very reasonable to expect affordable and accessible high-quality education, world-class healthcare here in our state, provide that cutting-edge research and take advantage of the benefits that come out of that, and then to partner any and everywhere we can across the state of Kansas. And that's really, we believe, a standard that we should be held to. And so I want to talk a little bit about how we're trying to meet all of those expectations. And if you look at the next slide to the question that was raised earlier, the Kansas Law Enforcement Training Center is a KU department. They run their campus in Yoder, is where the main law enforcement training center is. And if y'all have never had a chance to visit there, I'd strongly encourage you to do so. It's really impressive what they do down there. But they also now have partnered with our Edwards campus in Overland Park on a criminal justice degree, which is a new and one of our fastest growing degrees. But the Law Enforcement Training Center trains both first-time law enforcement, but also does continuing education for officers across the state. Most people don't realize either that we run the Kansas Fire and Rescue Training Institute, which is more of a mobile enterprise. It's based out of Lawrence, but they do about 150,000 miles a year of travel going to communities across the state to help train our predominantly our volunteer fire departments on how to safely execute their job for both firefighters and the EMS. The Kansas Biological Survey runs all sorts of activities, but one of the more frequently used ones is remote sensing technologies to help our farmers across the state understand water saturation and other elements that they can observe on scale through remote sensing. The Geological Survey, you probably are pretty familiar with. They have tens of thousands of cores that have from most of the wells that have ever been drilled in the state of Kansas, and that's a resource for our Kansas companies when they want to come and see what's under the ground that they're considering exploration. But they also monitor a lot of those wells that are drilled. So over 1,400 drills, that are wells that they monitor the water levels on and then work with the local population to help try and manage. As we all know, we have a water problem, particularly in western Kansas, and they're very active in that part. We also know it's important for us, particularly for our various professions, to provide the mandatory continuing education that occur in essentially all fields, whether it's engineers, doctors, attorneys, nurses, architects, and others, all have required training they have to do every year, and we are the largest provider of that across the state as well. That said, as you alluded to, Mr. Chair, there are headwinds in higher education, to be certain. And when we look at the next slide, we can talk about a few of those, but certainly we're seeing a lot of change. We're seeing changes in education models. We're seeing significant pressure on our federal funding at various levels, whether it's from financial aid or grants. We're seeing a lot of pressure on really just a consideration of whether higher education is worth the return on investment. I'll show you that it is, but that's certainly been part of the public conversation. We know enrollment trends are going to be challenging. They are already in the state and across the country, and that's going to continue. And then, of course, costs always continue to go up as they do for every industry. But really, it's the pressure on all of our various revenue streams that have put us in a position to really try to be the best stewards we can and manage our way through this. We certainly do struggle with mandatory compliance and oversight, which has gone up exponentially over the last decade by the federal government. And then there's been a little bit of chaos in athletics, if you have been reading any headlines at all, that we're trying to manage our way through as well. If you look at the next slide, really, we have worked very hard, and I have my CFO, Jeff DeWitt, here with me, who we stole away from the District of Columbia. He was the CFO of Washington, D.C. I was happy to get out of D.C., I think. I think it's the only reason he's here in Kansas, but but has done a great job of helping us better organize ourselves for better operations and really to better understand our fiscal situation in a business-like fashion. But really, since 2017, we've taken about $145 million of annual operating expenses out of the Lawrence campus. And that includes over 30 million this current year that we are taking out of operating expenses. Among other things, we closed 120 programs that were underperforming to be more efficient and effective. At the medical center, doing similar work. At the same time, we're trying to manage growth at the medical center. We're also trying to manage through these same budgetary challenges. So I have actually had in the last year more restrictive hiring and really on the staff and administration side to try and manage through that, but likely we'll be doing some operational cuts at the medical center as well. Doing all that so that we can really put our money where the mission really is and be good stewards of the resources the state provides us. If you go to the next slide. We've taken a couple approaches to this. One of them is obviously to diversify our revenue streams. And so we, one revenue source we have is, of course, student tuition. And we've done a big effort in student recruitment. And at a time when enrollments are dropping across the country, we've set new enrollment records for the last 3 years. And our average freshman class is now over 5,000 students. It had been running about 4,100 students 5 years ago. So significant growth there has certainly helped. It costs more too, but it's a good growth, much like at the medical center. We're doing more online. We'll be the first AAU research university to do competency-based education, to have a master's degree using that technology and methodology. And then trying to think about how we can use our facilities in a more effective fashion in hosting conferences and other activities to generate revenue there. Big emphasis on corporate partnerships, things like Panasonic, who's been a great partner with us. And then, of course, working on philanthropy. At the same time, though, we've, as I mentioned, have been working very hard to drive cost out of our system. We have a One KU initiative that we've been talking about for a handful of years, but really in earnest the last 2 years. And that's really trying to consolidate our operating teams between the medical center and the Lawrence campus. So instead of having 2 CFOs, we have 1 CFO and so on through the organization, and trying to find efficiencies and cost savings there. And really using technology to help us understand where our expenses are and how to better manage those, and through more robust procurement systems, space utilization, trying to take space offline that we don't need. And then we are currently in our 3rd voluntary separation program for faculty, third one since 2017. And that, again, is mostly on the Lawrence campus. And you'll see that's where some of that reduction in FTE is coming from. If you look at the next slide, I talked a little bit about the economic impact study that we did. If you dive into that a little bit deeper, that translates to activities at KU supporting 87,000 jobs across the state, or 1 in every 23 jobs is somehow related to an activity that we're doing at the university. And if we were an industry sector, we'd be the 10th largest industry sector for the state, just at the University of Kansas. And if you go to the next slide, we really, with that enrollment growth, we have more Kansas students than any other institutions. We have more out-of-state students than any other institution, and we have more international students than any other institution. I mentioned almost 18,000 degrees last year. 43% of our students come from outside the state of Kansas, and that's a really important feature that allows us to be one of the biggest talent magnets in the state. And those students come from 50 states and actually over 100 countries. But for about a quarter of those out-of-state students today stay and take a job right here in our region. So they came to us from Chicago or Dallas or Minneapolis. They get a degree here at KU and take a job right here in our marketplace. And so we're able to import a significant number of those students. And when you're talking about 13,000 out-of-state students, that's a lot of out-of-state kids coming to our region to take jobs. And it's been a very attractive element to our conversation with folks like Panasonic. And on the return on investment question, the data just continues to show there's no debate about that, really, with over a 20% return year over year on the investment that you make in a degree from the University of Kansas. If you go to the next slide, we, as I mentioned, have achieved overall enrollment growth, and I want to thank you all for some of that, because your recent increases in state-based aid has actually helped us recruit more students, more Kansas students, in particular with those funds. We still fall behind, pretty significantly fall behind all the neighboring states in terms of the amount of state-based aid that we provide. But I think we are showing a return on that investment, and hopefully, as you'll see, that's one of those things we will continue to advocate for across the state and across all of the Regents institutions. If you go to the next slide, we certainly have more employees in the state of Kansas as alumni. And if you look at the 49 most common jobs held by our alumni, 41 of them are classified as high demand, high wage. And so we're filling those important jobs that we need across the sector, and certainly our alumni are critical in many elements, with healthcare, engineering, business certainly taking the lead in those. If you go to the next slide, I'll talk a little bit more specifically about healthcare. We have a presence in one way, shape, or form, whether it's through telemedicine, remote clinics, continuing education, or actually physical presence in all 105 counties of the state. Our 3 medical school campuses, Kansas City, Wichita, and Salina, continue to grow, but really have a strong focus in our top 5 ranked nationally in terms of putting physicians into a rural environment. And that's certainly important, as we know we've got some shortages continuing out there. And the School of Nursing is working hard and is now running the Kansas Nursing Workforce Center to look at the nursing shortage that we're seeing across the state as well. And currently, over half of the physicians practicing in the state of Kansas are graduates of the University of Kansas. So we know if we can train them here, we're more likely to keep them here, which is why we will continue to try and grow our residency programs. And as we open the Wichita Biomedical Campus, that will allow us to expand our medical school class size pretty significantly as well. If you go to the next slide, I just want to touch a little bit more on the research side of it. As the state's only AAU research university, those are the top 38 public research universities, top 70 overall, but 38 of those are public. This is a core part of what we do, and it's really tackling critical areas, whether it's in healthcare, energy, or transportation, cybersecurity being a very big focus for us. And in recent years, we've really tried to hone in on areas that we have great expertise in research and try not to be everything to everybody. And that has allowed pretty significant growth, particularly at the medical center and the research side. If you go to the next slide, we can talk a little bit about the medical center with our NCI designated cancer center, which you all have supported consistently since the mid 2000s. That's now comprehensively designated, the highest one there is. And the most important thing to say, why do we care if we have that designation? Well, survival rates are 25% higher if you get treated at a comprehensively designated cancer center. That's a big statement if you think about it. And that's because of the comprehensive nature of the care teams and the therapies available, including to state-of-the-art trials. But not everybody can go to Kansas City to get treated, which is why we have the Masonic Cancer Alliance, which has 19 sites across the state of Kansas that allows us to push those clinical trials out across the state so the patients can get treated closer to home and really extend that. If you go to the next slide, we're really going down the same path with our Alzheimer's Disease Research Center, which one of only 35 in the country, but probably one of the more important ones right now because the area of research that we focus in, which is metabolism in the brain, is looking like it may be one of the keys to getting ahead of this disease. And the Brain Healthcare Accelerator is really developing new tools that we think we can start to diagnose Alzheimer's maybe 20 years before their symptoms. And we know that prevention is the best way to treat that. So it's allowing us to get ahead of the curve on that. And they're working on the Cognitive Care Network, which, much like the Masonic Cancer Alliance, pushes all of that information and those techniques out into our communities. So patients don't have to wait 9 months to be evaluated. They can be evaluated close to home. And we know that the earlier you get diagnosed, the earlier the treatment can get started and the more effective it is. So that's one area that we will be talking about this year with you all as well. And if you go to the next slide, I'm almost done here, so hang with me. Really, we continue to really drive to build the best, strongest research university we can in this part of the country. We think we've done that, but it is certainly getting tougher. It's more competitive. It's more challenging. Research dollars have moved at a pace of about 1% a year from the center of the country to the coast over the last 30 years. And now about 80% of the funding is consolidated on the coast from the research institutes, and that's a challenge for the center part of the country. So those are things that we've been battling, we've been having some success against, but we know that that will continue, and we know that we can't afford to fall behind for the state. What we're going to be talking about this year, if you go to the next slide, really are two main areas. The first area is really system-wide. This is really for all the border regents. Institutions that focus on state need-based aid to help make sure that education is still accessible to our students. We are really challenged on the salary side and are significantly below market, which is what puts us at risk of losing our best and our brightest. So if the state is doing a salary increase, we would implore that you include us in that, which isn't always the case. And then continuing investing in student success. We not only have our highest enrollment, we have our highest graduation rate, and we have our highest retention rate in the history of the university. And that's thanks to the investments the state has made through student success. And then for consideration of investments this go around, I know money's tight this year. Alzheimer's is a critical one for us. And we know that we're going to need to be able to take those technologies and push them out into our communities across the state. Alternative energy sources, really investing through creating an energy office, if you will, which the state of Kansas does not have, to help coordinate all of our energy sources. We're blessed to be one of the few states to have every energy source there is, but we are not coordinated. So helping to do that. And then lastly, high performance computing. In the world of AI, this is becoming increasingly important, but you need to be able to do it in a secure fashion. And that's what the state does not have, is a secured high performance computing system that we can do all sorts of research, but certainly any unclassified or classified research has to be able to be done in a safe environment. And that we would propose that we could be the center for doing that for the state to make that accessible to all agencies of the state. And we believe we're the best place to do that. And with that, Mr. Chair, I'd be happy to take questions.
Thank you, Chancellor. Do we have any questions? Representative Amix.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chancellor, it's good to see you again. The question that I had about the $100 million bonding authority housing bond.
Yes.
If I remember right, I think maybe it did include both the new facilities there and the Gateway project, plus renovations to some of the housing units that we have.
This particular funding is, so the housing associated with Gateway Project is actually a private developer doing that in partnership with us. This money would be used for two things. One is to purchase the Hawker apartments that we're currently leasing as student housing, because we have a significant demand, as you well know, on campus as we've grown our enrollment. And then the other funds will be used probably to replace Oliver Hall or something like that. You remember we took that building down a handful of years ago, but we now need the capacity. The other renovations that we have are actually already in other forms of our budget, but this is for those two big projects.
More too.
Go right ahead.
Thank you, sir. Going to the medical center campus, and this has to do with the 67 million on the cancer center. Okay, if I recall right, year or two ago when we considered the first amounts of money that we put in, there was a request that you all were going to make for a grant from the federal government. Did that come through?
Yes, sir. We've actually, and just to refresh the memory of the committee, we had a number of things that have come through. The philanthropic community came forward with a $75 million challenge to the state, and the state did match that using ARPA dollars. So that was a great boost. Working predominantly with Senator Moran, a little bit with Representative Davids, but really with Senator Moran, has brought in multiple tranches of federal money to the table. You may have read, actually just this week, he got the bill out of the Senate that has $36 million for this project of federal money, but then there's been, I think, another 16 or so million of federal money for this project as well that's kind of come in over time. This most recent project or funding from the federal government will help us. We were going to have to shell out 2 or 3 of those floors. We're going to be able to build them out with this federal money. So it's really been a tremendous boost for us.
Mr. Chairman, one last.
Right ahead.
Chancellor, so then the 67 million, would this complete all of the structure?
Is that 67 though? Is that just the remnant to the 75? I believe it is. But with all the sources that we have, yes, we believe we're going to be able to complete the entire building, which is great news for us.
Boost to our state.
And with the growth rate of our research enterprise over there right now, we need it very quickly, actually. We're out of research space, and as I said, it's growing 17% year over year. That's something we need to continue to drive.
I gotta say, I think it's one of those facilities that the disease affects so many families. It's tough. Yeah, I appreciate the work that you all do.
We are fortunate in that our team is on the cutting edge of cellular-based therapy, CAR T therapy, which we're one of the leaders in the United States on. We've had people come from 50 different countries to get therapies here for that. But that's another component of what's being built on the clinical side of it, is to really support the CAR T therapy. And it would be an honor to get this committee over there to tour sometime as we get a little bit further down the road.
Sounds like a great idea, Chancellor. All right. Last call for the Chancellor before I put a flak jacket on him and start peppering him. Representative Haskins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I feel obligated to give you a few softball questions now. So what is a Jayhawk? No.
How much time do you have?
Yeah, let's milk this. Mr. Chair. So thank you for your presentation. As one of our flagship universities, it's always great to have you kind of kick off what we should look for in Kansas higher education, especially public education. And looking at the budget, and I have been pretty open about this. Last night, I even said it at the Midwest Higher Ed Compact. I'm concerned about the amount of your expenditures that are continuing to be covered by students, and for over the last, and I did the math, 40 years ago, we covered half.
Mhm.
20 years, it was a quarter, and today it's 1/6.
Yep.
And I just wonder two things. Have you seen a shift in the view of public higher ed education as being still a public good of investment, or is it more of a private benefit?
Yeah, your observation is spot on. So, and we know this actually from polling as well, which we've done through the AAU, that there has been a shift in the last, I would say 15 years, a shift that coming out of World War II, there's a perception that it was a public good, and therefore the GI Bill and federal student loan programs came to be, and really accommodated rapid growth in higher ed, and with rapid growth of the baby boom generation. Obviously, we're past that bubble, if you will. But there's also been a shift away from this perception of it being a public good, and that it's more of a private good and therefore private responsibility, which has shifted the cost. It's inverted the cost ratio to the families, which then drives that question of, is this a good investment? Because it's an investment. Even as affordable as we are in the state compared to most of our counterparts, it's still quite an investment for a family. And we know that when we look at our students, half of our students graduate with zero debt, but the other half that graduate with debt graduate with about $28,000 of debt, which is not insignificant when you're starting out your life. So that continues to be a challenge. The affordability piece continues to be a challenge. We continue to try and fundraise for that, and endowment provides us, close to $100 million worth of scholarships. It helps. But that's why I was talking about state need-based aid is a key part of that for our families to make it affordable.
And I appreciate that. And I just draw the attention to page 7 to the committee that 57.2% of the funds, the covering it by fee funds. And so it brings up the question, when do we no longer have public universities and they're all private? And I would encourage you to circle back and make a tie to the benefits to the economy, how SGF has a correlation that the more you invest, this is what we get off this, imagine. I would encourage that. But my last question, Mr. Chair, is in reference to the Kansas Board of Regents. Yesterday, they came out with a proactive stance as far as how we can address tenure and how we can evaluate the faculty who have tenure. I was wondering if you're aware, if you can expound on that and what impact this may have to public higher ed.
Sure, yeah. This is not a state of Kansas conversation. This is a national conversation, as we know. And there's this sense and concern that tenure equates to a job for life. And we actually feel like we have quite robust processes in place. I will tell you, with what the Board of Regents just passed, it's the most robust one in the United States, hands down. The impact on higher education, tenure is a very critical thing for us as a research university, and being able to attract the best and the brightest talent, because it's not even about protecting the job as much as it is a scholastic benchmark of your career. And so it's critical for us that we have that if we're going to remain competitive as a research university. I would argue with what the Regents did, certainly should rest anybody's mind if they're concerned that these people are not being held accountable, because they absolutely are, and they work quite hard.
Could you go into details? Because my understanding is like they get reviewed after 5 years. If they get, if they're in trouble, they get sanctioned, and then the next review, if they haven't improved, they can be dismissed. Is that roughly it?
And it's kind of always been that way in a sense, but it's tightened up. It was 7 years, now it's 5 years. It's 7 years to get tenure. So you gotta prove your worth for 7 years before you even get it, and then it's another 7 years before you get promoted to full professor, and then the 5 years start kicking in for reviews to make sure that once you've gotten that far, you're still doing your job, right? And so really what the Regents did will allow a collection of data to support that fact. I mean, we've been doing it that way for some time. We've had post-tenure review in this state for probably 7, well, actually, I was at the medical center when we did it, so it's been over 10 years. That's what most states are trying to do, is get to do what Kansas did 10 years ago. And that's been effective. We've had people retire, we've had people change jobs, if you will, as a result of those post-tenure reviews. It is a lot of work. And that's, my only concern about going to 5 years is just the amount of work it takes, and that's time you're not spending doing teaching or research. So it will take a lot of effort.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Representative Wagner, thank you for being patient.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Very good presentation, President. Thank you very much. You made a comment about KU, about the cancer center having like a 25% higher survivor rate than others. How does that compare? I know people go to like MD Anderson or Mayo clinics or something. I mean, how far up does that bring us as far as in being a sort of a destination?
I would argue we go toe to toe with any of those enterprises. They're bigger in scale, meaning because you have people coming from all over the world to go to MD Anderson or Sloan Kettering in New York, and they only do cancer. We do things more than cancer. So their volumes are higher than ours, but our survival rates are as good.
A follow-up question. You mentioned how, the research element at KU is quite big. I see it's like 1,000 FTEs and approximately 170, 200 million bucks, whatever. So your people are, making proposals every year, for research projects. I mean, do you track what percent, like their sort of win-loss ratio? Like people have X amount of potential and you guys at the end of the year, I mean, how is that percentage? I mean, how you guys?
Absolutely. And I will tell you, we measure it both locally, but also federally. So if you go to the National Institutes of Health, which is the largest research funding organization in the world by far, their funding rate, so if they get 100 proposals from around the country, they fund 9 of them. And so the success rate is low. So it does come down to shots on goal, if you will, of repeatedly getting them in. And then that is actually one of the biggest measures for tenure in our system, is your ability in the hard sciences to achieve that kind of funding. So we do track it. We do track how many we put in every single year. We track how many of those get funded, from which agencies, and which agencies are growing, which ones are shrinking, which ones. It is a, and the way the system really works is the agency puts out the request for proposal. So the area that they want researched, and then the scientist puts in a proposal for how they would go about doing that. And then that's what they select from and decide to fund. So it's not really 100% coming from the scientists themselves. We're really responding to what the agency would like to be studied. And so the agency controls most of that.
One final question on this. So, if somebody won a grant, like a $10 million grant for some sort of research project, I mean, of that, what is your marginal cost? I mean, do you, I mean, there's sort of a profit in a sense. I mean, revenue versus just the marginal cost of fulfilling it. I mean, how much of a win is it for the university that it actually generates additional funds to cover the cost of the operation?
I won't let my CFO answer this question.
Okay.
We do well to break even on research.
Right.
Yeah. Because it takes a lot of overhead to do it as well. And they do not fully fund the overhead on the research that we're doing. So we have to do it by scale. And it is like everything else, though, something like that doing more at scale does make it more financially viable. And so the more you do, so as I said, we've grown now to just $500 million, about 2/3 of which is federal. That makes it much more economically viable to continue to do it. But you have to build new buildings like the Cancer Center building and a brain health building that we're going to get started in the next couple of years to accommodate the growth of the research.
Thank you.
It's an interesting relationship.
We do allow phone a friend, so if you have anything to add to that question, feel free. That's good. He nailed it. You were worried.
He sweats.
Right.
It's his
Okay.
job.
Mr. Vice Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Chancellor, for being here today. Can you, I know it's a big topic right now and it's going to be hard to explain because it's a big overview, but can you talk a little bit just about the NIL, transfer portal, athletics, and just why we need to be competitive in that, and then just the overall success and what that means for Kansas for some of our bigger schools? You don't have to just say KU alone, but K-State as well. What that means to the state of Kansas being successful.
Let me start with the impact it has, and then I'll get to the challenges that we're dealing with today. But you can't underestimate the marketing value of having Power Four conference teams to your schools. And we're in the midst of an economic impact study that'll demonstrate that, and hopefully have that in the next handful of weeks. And Kelly, I'm sure we could share it with this committee when we get that. But it's in the hundreds of millions of dollars. But for us, it's also, as I said, we're 43% out-of-state students. I can measure the impact that it has when we've been a basketball school for a little while, but when we actually had a football program that started going and we hosted TCU on a beautiful October afternoon, and ESPN Game Day came to Kansas for the first time for football, was that day, and ran a camera from the top of the hill into the stadium up and down for almost 4 hours for an infomercial. We saw 20% growth in our student population. That's the power of it. And it's estimated to be $300 to $400 million worth of marketing revenue. So for us, now, if you're Michigan and you turn away 80% of your applicants, it's maybe less relevant, but for us, it's really very relevant in this part of the country. The challenges that we're facing stem largely out of a series of lawsuits that we, as in collegiate athletics, have lost repeatedly over the last 5 years. And essentially, the premise of those lawsuits is that the NCAA setting national rules and guidelines is a violation of antitrust, that they have a monopoly. And the courts have said that. It's a monopoly and you can't do it. So that was sort of the starting of the break of around name, image, and likeness, or student athletes actually being able to make money, which is a pretty reasonable tenet when you think about it. And so that it started down that path, but those lawsuits have continued. Anytime there's been an attempt to put any kind of rule around it, that rule gets challenged and we lose. And so the current environment is, there are rules. They're just being challenged a lot in court. And so it's not the Wild Wild West in that there are rules, and we've created now, the NCAA is reorganized. This is a long-winded answer, so cut me off anytime. But they have reorganized to stream down, create one board that makes all the rules for Division I. Out of that, we created the College Sports Commission, which is tasked with enforcing two things in particular: the name, image, and likeness is appropriate and an appropriate market value, and then to make sure that the spending caps, we've gone into a revenue share environment, and that those caps are met. So we do have an enforcement environment for that. What we really need is federal legislation that says this is not like the NFL has. The NFL has antitrust protection from Congress. We're going to need some version of that. And there's something called the SCORES Act that is sitting in both the House and the Senate, version of it in the Senate right now. We almost got it this fall. We'll see if we can get it this spring. But that lets you start putting some guardrails back on it right now. But things like eligibility and transfer are the big topics right now. You know, I used to be able to transfer, you had to sit a year if you transferred. Now, essentially, you can transfer at the moment every year if you want to 4 institutions, which is not good for education or anything else. So some rationale around that. And then there's actually a lawsuit right now requesting unlimited eligibility in college, meaning you can go to college forever and play forever. So that, I mean, it just is kind of the chaos of it all is really creating a challenge, but it's also putting a profound financial burden on the system, which is not sustainable. So it's the other reason we've got to be able to get to a more controlled environment.
And that SCORES Act has it been heard? Are there any hearings on it, or just sitting in somebody's desk
It has not been heard on the floor yet.
on the floor, but committees?
In committees. It's come out of committee, but it hadn't been heard on the floor. In the House, not in the Senate. And Senator Brandt's been a great proponent for us through all of this.
Anything further for the chancellor? Strapped up, you ready to go?
Absolutely.
All right. You had a great presentation. It just spawned about 100 questions from me. So I've had several conversations, including with your CFO, surrounding the demographic changes that are headed our way in higher ed as a whole. Could you highlight for the committee what you're doing to prepare for the coming demographic shift? Though you are experiencing a high right now, That is not what the crystal ball is telling us, right? So what are you doing as an institution to prepare for this?
Absolutely. When I took this job 9 years ago, I actually made the statement in a community address that we needed to be leaner, meaner, and we were going to be smaller. I didn't expect to be where we are today. Um, and, and, um, and we know that that pressure is only going to continue. We are just, I mean, it's been dropping for almost 10 years, but the drop really starts. The cliff is really a 3% 1-year drop following 2008 drop in birth rates. But then it continues, actually. We know it's going to continue to at least 2035. Some predictions are that up to 25% of institutions will close over that period of time. We also know that in addition to just the sheer number, demographics of those people are changing, and the college going rate has dropped 9% nationally and in Kansas. So whereas if you 10 years ago, 55% of Kansas high school graduates did something after that, whether it's community college, tech school, university, whatever, that number is now about 45%. So we've seen not only a smaller pool to draw from, but fewer of those kids in that pool moving on to some other level of education. Which is interesting in an environment where the market tells us that the demand for higher education in the industry is going up, not down. That as we get into more technologically advanced society, that the demand for more education is going to be there. We also know that not all the return on investment question drives how people look at institutions. And so it's clear that the public also values certain types of institutions more than others in terms of how they carry weight in the marketplace. And so research universities like ours are actually experiencing growth. Regional institutions and community colleges at large across the country have been hit the hardest. And then small liberal arts colleges are kind of somewhere in the middle. But if you're a small liberal arts college and you don't have a big endowment, you're going to be in trouble with what's coming.
Lead me right into my next question. So given your proximity to a unique two-year college in the state, Johnson County Community College, what are you doing as as one of the big three to coordinate, cooperate, share resources, plan ahead when you have something so unique in our state right next door to you? What are some of the things that you guys are working on to collaborate and
Sure.
continue this line of thinking, planning for the future together?
Well, we know that a number of things. One is we know that already we're needing to meet students in different places. There are some that always want the residential full-blown, I live here, go to school and live in a fraternity and take advantage of all those things. But increasingly, portions of the population aren't going to have access to that. So both the online and the competency-based education would be critical. And then our Edwards campus, which sits literally a mile and a half from Johnson County Community College, has a number of joint programs. Our degree in 3 is a good example of that we've had for actually over a decade, that a student can get a full year's worth of college through Johnson County while they're in high school, and then do another year at Johnson County, do 2 years at Edwards, and they've got their college degree in 3 years after high school. And just streamlining all that and building it in and trying to make that as smooth a transition as possible so that people don't leak out of it, increases retention through that. So we're just going to have to continue to be more creative about how we meet the needs. And we know that we're going to have more adult learners in the future too. As industries change, as AI changes, what happens in the marketplace, people are going to have to come back and be retooled. That may not be a college degree, but that's something that we're going to need to be able to provide.
And your transfer credit reciprocity with these 2 years, what's that look like?
We have over 120 classes right now that transfer, no questions asked, across the entire system. Now, if you change majors, that doesn't always help.
Now, you've mentioned the AAU several times now, and it's funny because I've heard this acronym for the first time yesterday, and I thought you were talking about track and field. So can you,
Sure.
for the committee, explain
If you
to
Google
us?
it, that's what comes up first.
Can you explain to us what the AAU is, your role on it, and the benefits that it provides us?
Sure. So the AAU is the Association of American Universities, was founded in the late 1800s to really advocate for research in America. KU's been a member since 1909. It currently consists of 70 institutions in North America, 68 of which are in the US, 2 are in Canada. But it's largely a research advocacy organization. It's 38 publics, the rest are privates, and it's everything from Harvard to Kansas. What we do as an organization is we really advocate in Washington predominantly for research funding and research programs and help provide input guidance to what new areas should be invested in going forward. An AAU institution as a top-tier research institution is really helps us attract the best and the brightest scientists and to keep them here. It's a major advantage for us to have that, and therefore it's a major advantage for the state to have that, to be able to attract and retain. And that the retention piece of that is one of the biggest challenges we face in Kansas. And you would hear the same from President Linton regarding K-State, is that we can grow them, but we tend to lose them as they get more mature and more developed in their research. And one scientist can take 20 or $30 million worth of research with them when they go in a whole lab. So, the startup is not inexpensive. So we do our best to try and keep them here once we've got them here. And that again, being an AAU certainly helps that. It helps them be recognized nationally. It makes it more likely they're going to get into the National Academy of Sciences. It helps us in a very broad way as to be a powerful research institution.
Yeah, I've seen that. I've seen a similar trend in the medical center as well. That the doctor leaves, they tend to take a whole group with
A
them.
whole group with them, yep.
You mentioned that a lot of this research is heading to the coasts at a pretty crazy rate. Can you tell us kind of what some of the variables for that would be? I mean, why are they going to the coasts?
We could be here quite a while and probably ought to have a beverage, but it's really a phenomenon of the rich get richer. The more, we were talking a little bit about the economics of it, the more you have, the more you can support, and the more you can support, the more you get. And it is really true that scale matters in the research industry, and that's a very big part of it. The director of the NIH, we had him on campus at the medical center a few months ago, shared with me that 20 institutions have 50% of his budget. So there are 20 universities that have 50% of the NIH budget. That's the consolidation that happens when you get to scale. So there's just more scale on the coast, if you will. And that's certainly a big part of it. But it's a little more subtle than that too. I mean, the people making the decisions are peers, but if that's where all the money is, that's where all the people are, that's where all the peers are, and they're the ones making all the decisions, right? And so it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy at some point. I will say the current director is trying to change that. We'll see if he has any success at that, but he has interest in making sure there's geographic distribution.
Appreciate that. I got two more, and then we can all take a breath. All of the big three institutions have an energy request. I know one of them makes sense, and the other two I have questions on. Tell me what you plan to do with this energy request, what that looks like, what kind, and to what end.
Sure. So our request is, and they are all different, pretty different actually, but complementary, I would argue. As you probably know, K-State's is really around nuclear and building out their nuclear capacity, educational and training capacity. Ours is really around coordinating energy across the state. So most states actually have an energy department at the state level. And it's if you think about it, we have oil, gas, wind, solar, nuclear, all in the state, and a real potential for hydrogen. So, and yet there's really no one place anybody can go and find out what we have, where it is, who's doing it, and how it's organized. And really the concept at the outset is to create an office where we can gather all that data and be a one-stop shop of energy for the state of Kansas.
Where would you plant this investment with a geological survey? What?
Probably a combination geological survey and School of Engineering working together. Makes the most sense. That's kind of what geological survey sort of does that already around some water and some other things. And the cores, of course, it would make sense to do it there. But that's the space that they live, work, and breathe in terms of working with the practitioners out across the state.
What kind of product would they be providing Kansas? Well, I mean, mean, like you say, we've got no government entity involving energy. Yeah, you're right. But I mean, some could argue the KCC does that in conjunction with the private sector. I mean, like, I guess.
Well, the biggest product would be, in fact, having a place for the private sector to go for one-stop shopping around working with energy, whether it's developing energy, using energy, producing energy. And increasingly, all the types of energy are crossing over, right? You've got to, if you're going to have wind and solar, you got to store it somehow. And and that's a play for Kansas around hydrogen is actually, there are about 6 reasons why Kansas is probably the best place in the country for hydrogen. But that's one way that you can store energy. But increasingly gas and oil as well, and pipelines can be flipped from one commodity to another. But there's no way to organize that here. You'd have to go out and figure it out individually. And we hear that from Evergy and our other partners in the state already.
So, okay, Evergy, would they be working with you, guiding, mentoring, or whatever or vice versa? I guess.
You know, the concept of this really came out of an initiative that we did with them and Terra and some other handful of companies. We put together a hydrogen hub proposal to give to the federal government. We missed by one getting that funded, but it was really working with all that and trying to pull the data together for that proposal that we realized just how hard it really was to understand what's happening in the state of Kansas around energy. And it really takes bringing all the private folks together, both the users and the providers, to collect that data in one place in a way that they don't feel threatened and that they can share it commercially, but not feel like they're giving up a competitive advantage of some kind. And you have to have kind of a broker for that.
And finally, another investment opportunity, your final one, high performance computing. Can you tell me what that might look like? Do you guys have something that exists already? I feel like we're kind of behind the curveball on this. If we're just
We are behind the curveball. We do have a computing center, but we do not have it at this scale. So think about a data center. We all hear about data centers coming up, and those are essentially just buildings full of computers that are processing data. Those are all part of open networks. And so if you decide you want to ask ChatGPT how to help you on your payroll system, you just released your payroll data to the world. It's gone. And so what you have to be able to do, and what the government's now requiring us to do, particularly in the research realm, is that you have to have that level of computer power, but you have to have it in a secured environment. So you can put data in it and know that you're not going to lose that data. And the government requires us to do that. And so increasingly, our competitiveness around research, doesn't matter if it's in cybersecurity or animal health, it's all the same. They have to have a place that you have to be able to show that you can do the work and control the data at the same time. But you have to have that level of power that you would get in a data center, and we don't have that level of power.
So would this idea be something that the institute, like all the higher ed institutions, cooperatively work on together, or is this something that's going to have to be unique to KU, unique to KSU?
No, I would argue it should be a statewide resource, and but honestly, the state government needs to be using it as well.
Right. That wraps up my long list of questions. I actually probably have 20 more, but I know we're running out of time. So I want to thank you again for coming. I appreciate it. I knew you were not feeling well earlier in the week, and I'm happy you were feeling good enough to come visit us today. That wraps up our hearing.
Thank you for the opportunity, sir.
Committee, a couple little cleanups of mine. I've got a couple corrections, record corrections I have for the WSU hearing. I missed that there is a Textron testimony in the S drive. Some of you may have caught it already, but if you have not, I recommend you go in there and read their testimony. It gives you some context. Additionally, and we mentioned today, thanks to WSU, it took me down this FTE rabbit hole a little bit so I could teach myself and mention it to you guys. Their FTE requests are also revolve around some research. How they phrased it, though, is a little confusing. I wanted to point that out. the way they phrased it was that some were in research, right? So I'm digging into that to try and differentiate what is exactly research FTEs and what is not. When I come to that, when I figure it out, I'll let you know. But I'm assuming we're gonna see that as we progress through these budgets. Like, the FTE requests, some are institutional, some are research, so it'll be up to us to figure it out. And that is all the WSU fixes I have for now. Representative Riley?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think it was brought out earlier that though those research dollars are just in and out, and so therefore those FTEs could be very fluid, and so therefore they were working for K-State, tomorrow we're working for KU, all over the place. And it was really hard to track all of that stuff.
Yeah, I agree with you, and it'll be up to us to navigate that. But now that we know that they're different, we can pay attention to that. Staff, what do we have on the agenda tomorrow? Yeah, what day is it? I don't know.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Since tomorrow's Thursday, the three regional institutions will be coming back. That's Pitt State, Emporia State, and Fort Hays State, for a second opportunity.
Great, thank you I appreciate that. So just for your guys' understanding, we brought in the regionals early. They gave us a 60,000-foot overview of what they have in their budgets. Tomorrow, they're gonna come in and they'll be more acute with the specifics of their budgets. And it gives another opportunity to to question whatever it is that we wanna get a little bit more information on. Hearing them early served twofold. One, it cut our teeth. Okay, we got to wrap our minds around budgets after thinking about the beach. And then this is another opportunity for us to learn from that and learn a little bit more about the regionals. On that, the next time we'll be working budgets. What budgets do we have to work on next, and on what day, Dayton?
Next week, next Tuesday, I believe. Is that right? So next week, we're going to, on Monday, hear about state aid to two-year colleges. So that's an informational hearing. On Tuesday, the 27th, it will be the K-State eStarp, and K-State Vet Med budget hearing. On Wednesday, we'll have another informational hearing about financial aid for KBOR and the universities, and then the private and independent colleges will discuss their budget. And then the 29th will be the coordinated institutions discussing their budget requests. So that's Thursday. That'll be Washburn, and the two-year colleges will be back. And then on Friday, we'll have the KBOR hearing where I'll present the budget summary.
So the next time we actually work budgets isn't until, yeah, recommendation.
The recommendations for all budgets will be the week of February 2nd. So throughout that week.
Okay, and then just for your guys' situational awareness, I did a report out for our first two budgets today. We have 4 total completed budgets. So the first 2 are today, the next 2 will be tomorrow. And then we have a break as we hear through the rest of them. I'll let you know when I have my next report out. With that, any questions from the committee? Okay, sorry, Dayton, go ahead. Oh, yes. Okay, good point. Thank you for the reminder, Jill. I know it's on your agenda as a reminder, but I just want to remind you that if you have any amendments or provisos as we're working through these budgets, and you plan to offer them in committee, bring those to Dayton and Jill so that they can write them out and get them to us so that as we review them, we're all on the same page. It saves everybody a bunch of time and hassle instead of having to restate the proviso 1,000 times over and over again. We all have them in front of us and we're all prepared. We can all go home on time. Okay, go ahead. Representative Riley. I'm sorry, say it again. Review the museum. I don't know. I'm unfamiliar. Okay, you're saying there's a dinner and a tour tonight. Okay, well, if you're going to that, enjoy that. Great. Okay. All right. Yeah, I must not have been invited. It's okay. All right, with that, that's it for me. We are adjourned. Thank you.